A mighty kingdom once ruled the Nile, and it was not Egypt. To the south, a civilization of immense power and profound mystery rose from the sands. This is the story of the lost Kingdom of Kush, the rival that did not just neighbor Egypt, but conquered it. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the secrets of the Black Pharaohs and grasp a forgotten chapter of human history, where divine kings and warrior queens shaped an empire. We will explore why their unique language remains a locked door, and what sacred rituals might have echoed within their steep-sided pyramids. What does the disappearance of a great civilization truly leave behind for us to find? Its heart was a stretch of the Nile, far south of the Egyptian delta, a land the Egyptians themselves called Toseti, the land of the bow. This was not a single city, but a sprawling kingdom anchored by three distinct landscapes. To the north lay Lower Nubia, a narrow ribbon of land between the river's first cataract at modern Aswan and the Great Bend of the Nile. This was the frontier, the first line of contact and often conflict with Egypt. Further south, the river opened into the vast Butona steppe, a savanna of grasslands that provided pasture for the herds that were the backbone of Kushite wealth. And at the southern apex of the kingdom, on a wide, fertile island between the Nile and the Atbara River, stood the later capital of Meroë, a place of such agricultural richness it was said to need no rain. This geography was everything. It was a blessing, placing Kush directly on the most lucrative trade route of the ancient world. Gold from the eastern deserts, ivory from the African interior, ebony, incense, and exotic animals all flowed down the Nile through Kushite lands on their way to Egypt and the Mediterranean. Kush controlled the gateway, growing immensely wealthy from this flow of treasures. But this same location was also a curse. Kush was perpetually in the shadow of its colossal northern neighbor. It was a buffer zone, a corridor that Egypt sought to control for its own security and greed. For centuries, Kush existed in this tense duality, a powerful kingdom in its own right, yet forever defined by its relationship with Egypt, at times a vassal, at times a rival, and at one stunning moment, its conqueror. The stage was set not for isolation, but for an inevitable and dramatic collision of empires. The story of Kush unfolds not as a single, unchanging empire, but as a civilization that reinvented itself across three magnificent chapters. The first of these, the Kerma culture, flourished for over 1,000 years, beginning around 2,500 years before the Common Era. This was the foundational kingdom, a powerful state that grew wealthy by controlling the trade of gold and ivory. Its capital, also called Kerma, was a sprawling city dominated by immense mud brick structures known as defufas. These were not palaces in the traditional sense, but towering temple platforms, the largest rising nearly 60 feet high. The rulers of Kerma were buried not in pyramids, but in vast, circular tombs, surrounded by hundreds of sacrificial retainers and livestock, a practice that speaks to a belief in a royal afterlife of immense scale and provision. For centuries, Kerma stood as Egypt's primary southern rival, a formidable power that even sacked Egyptian forts during periods of weakness. This golden age, however, would not last forever. The rising power of a newly unified and aggressive Egypt, specifically the new Kingdom Pharaohs, eventually led to Kerma's conquest around 1,500 years before the Common Era. For the next 5 centuries, Kush was effectively an Egyptian colony. Its people governed from afar, its culture deeply influenced by its northern overlord. But the spirit of Kush was merely dormant, not extinguished. Centuries later, as Egypt's own power fragmented into competing city-states, a new Kushite power emerged from the south, centered near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. This was the Napatan period, beginning around 750 years before the Common Era. The Napatans had absorbed Egyptian religion and royal symbolism, worshipping the god Amun, but they wielded these traditions with a fierce independence. Seeing the chaos in the north, a line of ambitious Kushite kings did the unthinkable. They marched down the Nile and conquered Egypt itself, establishing the 25th dynasty, the line of the so-called Black Pharaohs. For nearly a century, kings like Pi, Shabaka, and Tahaka ruled a unified kingdom stretching from the confluence of the Blue and White Niles all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. They restored traditional Egyptian art, architecture, and religious orthodoxy, viewing themselves as the true heirs to a legacy the Egyptians had squandered. This was the pinnacle of Kushite political power, a moment of stunning reversal where the former colony became the master. Yet their reign in Egypt was ultimately cut short by the invasion of the Assyrians, whose advanced iron weaponry proved too much for the Kushite armies. The Black Pharaohs retreated south, but they did not disappear. They simply entered their final, and in many ways most mysterious, phase. Retreating to their heartland, the kings of Kush established a new capital at Meroë, around 300 years before the Common Era. This began the Meroitic period, a final golden age that lasted for over 600 years. Here, distinctly Kushite elements came fully to the fore. While they continued to build pyramids, these were steeper and smaller than their Egyptian counterparts, clustered in royal cemeteries that still dot the desert today. Most significantly, the Meroites developed their own written language, the Meroitic script. We can read its elegant cursive and hieroglyphic characters. We can sound out the words, but to this day, no one fully understands their meaning. It is a language still waiting for its Rosetta Stone. This era saw powerful queens, known as Kandakes, who ruled as sovereigns in their own right, leading armies and negotiating with foreign powers like Rome. Meroë became a powerhouse of iron production, its furnaces lighting up the night sky, and it engaged in trade that reached across the Indian Ocean. This was a kingdom that had moved beyond simply mirroring Egypt, forging a unique identity that blended African, Egyptian, and Greco-Roman influences into something entirely its own. Yet, by the middle of the 4th century of the Common Era, the lights of Meroë went out. The great kingdom faded, its end shrouded in the same mystery as its untranslated language. What happened to bring down this final, brilliant incarnation of Kush? The answer lies in a confluence of shadows closing in from all sides. The immense power of the Kerma kingdom was built not on stone, but on earth and faith. Their capital city, also named Kerma, was a statement of permanence in the desert, a sprawling metropolis encircled by massive defensive walls and a deep, dry moat. Within this fortified ring, the city was laid out in a series of concentric circles, districts radiating outward from a sacred center. This circular design was far from accidental. In many ancient worldviews, the circle represented perfection, eternity, and the cosmic order. Kerma's layout may have been a physical echo of this belief, a mirror of the heavens here on earth, with its spiritual heart at the very core. And at that heart stood the Western Difufur. This was no ordinary building. Even today, its ruins rise nearly 60 feet from the plain, a colossal structure of sun-baked mud brick that has endured for over 4,000 years. The word Difufur itself comes from a Nubian term meaning something like pile or fortress, but its true purpose was almost certainly spiritual. It was a temple platform, a man-made mountain designed to elevate priests and rituals closer to the gods. Archaeologists believe its flat summit held a sanctuary, a place where the divine could descend to meet humanity. In this sense, the Difufur likely functioned as an axis mundi, a cosmic pillar connecting the earthly realm with the celestial one. It was the spiritual engine of the kingdom, the fixed point around which all of Kerma's power and identity revolved. But if the Defufa was the bridge to the gods, the royal tumuli reveal what the Kerma kings believed awaited them on the other side. These were not pyramids, but vast, circular burial mounds. Inside the largest, excavators found a scene of staggering scale and solemnity. The king was laid to rest on a sumptuous bed, his body adorned with precious ornaments. But he did not journey to the afterlife alone. Surrounding him in the tomb chamber were the bodies of hundreds of individuals, men, women, and even children, along with sacrificed livestock. This was not an act of mere brutality, but a profound theological statement. These retainers were chosen to accompany their sovereign into eternity, to serve him in a kingdom beyond death, just as they had in life. The scale of this sacrifice, sometimes exceeding 300 people for a single king, speaks to an absolute belief in royal divinity. The king was not just a political ruler, he was a cosmic linchpin, whose very existence in the afterlife guaranteed the continued order and fertility of the world he left behind. His death required an entire community to make the transition with him, ensuring his divine authority remained intact. So Kerma presents us with a complete spiritual architecture, a city designed as a cosmic diagram, a temple built as a stairway to heaven, and a burial practice that treated death as a royal migration to a continued reign. This was the foundational power of Kush, a power rooted in earth, brick, and an unshakable belief in the divine nature of kingship. This profound belief in divine kingship did not vanish with Kerma. It was merely reborn, transformed by centuries of Egyptian influence into a theocratic engine of conquest. When the Kingdom of Kush re-emerged as a major power in the Napatan period, its rulers did not simply see themselves as kings. They were living gods on earth, the direct, physical sons of the state deity, Amun. This was not a vague spiritual claim. It was the core political ideology that propelled their armies north to conquer Egypt itself. The pharaohs of Egypt were considered divine intermediaries, but the Kushite monarchs took this a step further. Their royal inscriptions declared them to be the literal offspring of Amun, conceived through a sacred union with the king's mother. This divine birth myth made the king the ultimate authority, a fusion of the celestial and the terrestrial whose very existence guaranteed the world's order. To challenge the king was to challenge the god, making Kushite society a true theocracy, where religion and state were indistinguishable. Central to maintaining this divine order was a figure of immense power, the god's wife of Amun. This was not merely a ceremonial title. The god's wife was a high priestess, often the sister or daughter of the reigning king, who served as the human consort of the god Amun. Her role was both intensely spiritual and deeply political. She controlled vast temple estates, commanded wealth and resources that rivaled the king's own, and played a key part in the rituals that affirmed the king's divinity. By serving as the god's earthly bride, she completed the divine circuit, legitimizing the king's rule through a sacred, symbolic family unit. The god's wife was a powerful check and balance within the royal system, a woman who could influence succession and policy from within the innermost sanctum of the state religion. Her existence shows us that Kushite power was a delicate, sacred balance, managed through roles that blurred the line between the human and the divine. But how did a living god know the will of his divine father? For that, the Kushites turned to a sacred mountain and the voice of prophecy. At the heart of their kingdom stood Jebel Barkal, a solitary sandstone mesa that the Kushites believed was the southern home of Amun. Within a temple carved into its base, priests maintained the oracle of Amun. This was the kingdom's spiritual command center. When major decisions loomed, From going to war to appointing a new ruler, the king and his advisors would seek the god's counsel. The process was shrouded in ritual. We can envision the statue of Ammon being carried in a sacred bark, its movements interpreted by attending priests as divine affirmation or denial. The pronouncements of the oracle were final and absolute. A king chosen by the oracle was unstoppable, his authority emanating directly from the god's will. From an esoteric perspective, this practice opens a window into ancient concepts of divine communication. Was this pure political theater, a way for the priestly class to steer the state? Or was it a genuine attempt to tap into a higher guidance, interpreting subtle signs and intuitions as the voice of the divine? The oracle transformed prophecy into statecraft, making faith the very fuel of empire. It was this unshakable conviction, this certainty that their kings were gods acting on direct orders from a mountain, that gave the Kushite armies the resolve to march into Egypt and claim the throne of the pharaohs for themselves. They were not invaders in their own eyes. They were liberators, divine agents restoring a sacred order that had been lost. Deep within the sacred precinct of Jebel Barkal, a slab of dark granite tells a story of holy war. This is the victory stela of Pharaoh Pi, discovered by archaeologists in the ruins of the Temple of Ammon. It is not a simple list of battles won. It is a spiritual manifesto carved in stone, a detailed chronicle of how a Kushite king from the south answered what he believed was a divine call to arms. The Egypt that Pi looked upon in the 8th century before the Common Era was in chaos. The once unified land had splintered into a patchwork of squabbling petty kingdoms, their rulers more interested in local power than in upholding the sacred traditions. To Pi, this was not just political instability. It was a cosmic crisis, a rupture in the fundamental order of the universe, what the Egyptians called Ma'at. Disorder or Isfit was reigning, and so the text tells us, the oracle of Ammon at Jebel Barkal spoke. The god commanded his son, Pi, to march north, to subdue the rebellious rulers, and to restore proper worship and balance. The stela meticulously documents this campaign, but every military action is framed as an act of profound piety. When Pi's army besieges cities, he is described as patiently waiting outside the walls, refusing to fight during holy festivals so as not to offend the gods. After his victories, he does not slaughter his defeated enemies in rage. Instead, he inspects their stables and horses, showing the concern of a true sovereign. And then he enters the temples to make lavish offerings to the local deities. He presents himself not as a foreign destroyer, but as the most devoted of all Egyptian pharaohs, here to rescue the gods themselves from neglect. This is the core of the Kushite self-image, revealed in Pi's own words. They saw themselves as the righteous restorers, the purifiers. The text portrays the Egyptian rulers he defeats not merely as political rivals, but as impious men who have forgotten ritual, who are unclean, who have allowed the sacred rites to falter. Pi, the Kushite, positions himself as the true guardian of Egyptian tradition, more Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves. His conquest is framed as a cleansing, a divine reset. He takes the throne not out of greed for territory, but out of a solemn duty to reunite the two lands under the correct worship of Ammon, and to realign the world with Ma'at. The stela, therefore, is far more than a historical record. It is spiritual propaganda of the highest order, crafted to legitimize a stunning political reality through an undeniable sacred narrative. It tells us that for Kush, power was always inseparable from purpose, and conquest was never just about land. It was about answering a god's call to mend a broken world. Pi's spiritual conquest set the stage for a dynasty of god kings who would rule both Kush and Egypt for nearly a century. This was the 25th dynasty, the era of the Black Pharaohs, and it represented the absolute zenith of Kushite influence. Following Pi, a succession of powerful rulers solidified this dual kingdom. His brother Shabaka formally united the two lands, moving the royal court to the ancient Egyptian city of Memphis. Shabaka is famously credited with preserving one of Egypt's most profound spiritual texts, the Memphite theology, by having it inscribed on a slab of stone for posterity. He was followed by Shebet-Ku, who further secured the empire, but the most renowned of these pharaohs was Taharqa. Crowned in Memphis around 680 years before the Common Era, Taharqa's reign was a golden age of construction and cultural flourishing. He embarked on massive building projects from the delta to deep within Kush itself, erecting and restoring temples dedicated to Amun. His most ambitious enterprise was a series of temples in Nubia, including a magnificent structure at the holy site of Kawa, which he described as being built as a work of eternity. In Egypt, he left his mark at Karnak, Thebes, and even as far north as Tanis. Taharqa wasn't just building monuments. He was weaving the two halves of his kingdom together with stone and faith, physically anchoring Kushite authority within the sacred landscape of Egypt. This era was a masterful act of cultural synthesis. The Kushite pharaohs enthusiastically adopted the Egyptian pantheon, with Amun at its head, and commissioned art in the classic Egyptian style. They wrote their royal inscriptions in flawless Egyptian hieroglyphs. To an outside observer, they might have seemed completely Egyptianized, but beneath this polished surface, a distinct Kushite identity remained fiercely intact. Their portraiture in sculpture holds a subtle clue. While posed in traditional Egyptian regalia, the faces of the Black Pharaohs often show pronounced. Realistic Kushite features fuller lips, broader noses, and a unique sense of stoic power. They did not erase themselves to fit the mold. They expanded the mold to include themselves. Furthermore, the heart of their power, the oracle of Amun at Jebel Barkal, remained the ultimate source of their legitimacy, a spiritual anchor located firmly in their southern homeland. They ruled Egypt, but their divine mandate flowed from the Kushite mountain of God. This leads to a compelling esoteric perspective. Some scholars and researchers suggest the Kushite pharaohs saw themselves not as fond students of Egyptian wisdom, but as custodians of a much older, primal Nile Valley tradition. Could it be that in conquering Egypt, they believed they were returning to the source, reclaiming a spiritual legacy that originated even further south, in the heart of Africa? Their deep reverence for Amun, a god whose earliest known worship centers are in Kush, hints at this possibility. They may have viewed the Egyptian version of the religion as a derivative copy, one that had become corrupted over time. Their mission, then, was a restoration in the truest sense, a return to a purer, more ancient form of divine kingship and cosmic order that the Egyptians themselves had forgotten. The 25th dynasty, therefore, stands as a profound moment of fusion, where two great river civilizations became one under rulers who embodied both, yet answered to a god who spoke from a southern mountain. Their time in the northern limelight, however, was destined to be tested by a storm from the east. The storm from the east arrived with the relentless beat of iron-shod boots. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, a military machine of terrifying efficiency, was expanding westward, and the rich lands of Egypt were its inevitable target. For the Kushite pharaoh Taharqa, this was more than a territorial conflict. It was a clash of worlds, of ideologies, and of technologies. The Assyrian armies were equipped with weapons of a new age, forged from iron, which was harder and more durable than the bronze still favored by the Kushite forces. Their tactics were brutally systematic, employing siege engines, disciplined infantry formations, and psychological warfare designed to shatter an enemy's will. Taharqa fought valiantly, winning several early engagements, but the Assyrian tide proved overwhelming. In a series of brutal campaigns, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon pushed south, capturing Memphis and eventually driving Taharqa from his Egyptian throne. The dream of a unified Nile Empire under Kushite rule was fracturing under the hammer of Assyrian iron. This was not, however, a story of utter annihilation. The Kushite response to this military pressure reveals a deep strategic intelligence. Following further defeats under Taharqa's successor, Tanutamon, the decision was made not to fight to the last man on foreign soil, but to execute a disciplined, strategic retreat. The royal court, the army, and the core of the state's power withdrew hundreds of miles up the Nile, back to their spiritual and political heartland around Napata and the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. They abandoned Egypt, but they preserved the Kingdom of Kush. This retreat can be seen as a profound act of consolidation. By falling back to their geographic and cultural fortress, they traded a vast, difficult-to-defend territory for a compact, deeply familiar homeland. The lifeline of the Nile, which had been their highway to conquest, now became a defensive moat, with the cataracts acting as natural barriers against northern pursuit. The Assyrians, stretched thin by their own empire, did not press a full-scale invasion into the harsh Nubian desert. Kush survived by choosing its ground. But was this decision purely military and political? From the perspective of the Kushite theocracy, it almost certainly carried a divine mandate. We must consider the central role of the Oracle of Ammon at Jebel Barkal. For centuries, the god's voice, interpreted by his priests, had directed the destiny of the kingdom. It had commanded Pi's northward conquest. Is it not logical, then, that it also sanctioned the southward retreat? Faced with the unprecedented threat of the Assyrians, the priests may have interpreted setbacks not as a failure of their god, but as a sign that his favor had been withdrawn from the northern venture. The message from the oracle could have been one of redirection, a sacred command to return to the source of their power, to purify their focus, and to defend the true home of Ammon himself. The retreat to Napata, therefore, can be framed as a spiritual homecoming. It was a return to the Axis Mundi, the holy mountain, to regroup under the direct gaze of their state deity. They were not fleeing in disgrace. They were answering a call to protect the sacred core. This turning point marks a crucial pivot in Kushite history. The ambition to rule a dual kingdom was set aside, but the independent divine kingdom of Kush was far from finished. In fact, freed from the immense burden of administering Egypt, it was about to enter its most unique and enigmatic chapter, one where it would forge an identity entirely its own, further south in the fires of Meroë. The retreat to Napata was not an ending, but a recalibration. Within a few generations, a profound shift began within the heart of Kushite power. The royal court started to look further south, to a place where the Nile makes a great bend and the grasslands stretch to the horizon. This was Meroë. By around 300 years before the Common Era, it had become the new capital, the new spiritual and political center of the kingdom. On the surface, the reasons for this move were deeply practical. Meroë sat on a vast island of fertile land between the Nile and the Atbara River, a region so rich in rainfall and soil that classical authors later marveled it required no irrigation from the Nile. Here, the kingdom could feed itself with greater security. More importantly, the hills around Meroë were thick with forests, providing the endless fuel needed for a revolutionary industry, iron smelting. The city became an ancient industrial powerhouse, its skies glowing at night with the light of countless furnaces, producing the weapons and tools that would define its final age of independence. Yet, for a civilization so deeply guided by divine geography, could such a monumental move be only about resources? Esoteric traditions suggest that when a sacred lineage relocates its center of power, it is often seeking more than better farmland. It is seeking a new alignment. The spiritual authority of Napata had been inextricably linked to the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, the home of Ammon. That site remained holy, and kings were still crowned there, but the active seat of power moved. This could signal a desire to tap into a different current of telluric energy, to establish a fresh axis mundi for a new era. After the experience of ruling and then losing Egypt, the Kushite priesthood may have felt that the older religious sphere had become spiritually congested, or even corrupted by foreign contact. Meroë, further removed from the northern sphere of influence, offered a clean slate. It was a landscape unburdened by the direct shadow of Egyptian theology, where Kushite traditions could evolve and hybridize with other African influences flowing from the interior of the continent. Some researchers point to the prominence of lion gods and a powerful indigenous goddess named Amsemi in Meroitic art as evidence of this southern synthesis. The move, therefore, might be seen as a deliberate spiritual recentering, a conscious step away from the now complicated legacy of Egypt to forge a kingdom that was, in its essence, more purely Kushite. Meroë was not a rejection of the past, but a declaration of a separate future. It became the new stage where the final and most mysterious act of Kushite civilization would play out. And so, in this new southern capital, they began to write their own story in a language meant only for themselves. One of the most profound legacies of the Meroitic period is also its most impenetrable mystery, the Meroitic script. This was their own unique writing system, developed around the 2nd century before the Common Era, and it represents a final, decisive break from Egyptian cultural dominance. For centuries, they had used Egyptian hieroglyphs to write royal decrees and temple inscriptions. But at the height of their independent power, the Meroites crafted an alphabet all their own. We have not just a few examples, but thousands of inscriptions. They cover tall, slender offering stelae placed in tombs. They are carved into temple walls and etched onto small ritual objects. The script comes in two elegant forms. The first is a hieroglyphic version, used for royal and religious monuments, with beautifully stylized symbols of animals, people, and objects. The second is a flowing, cursive script, used for everyday administrative and commercial purposes, a kind of elegant handwriting scratched onto potsherds or written with ink. And here lies the tantalizing frustration for historians. We can read the Meroitic script. We know what sound each of its 23 letters makes. We can pronounce the words out loud, but we have almost no idea what those words mean. It is a language still waiting for its cipher, a library of knowledge where we know the alphabet but not the stories. Imagine holding a book where you can sound out every syllable on every page, yet the narrative itself remains a beautiful, meaningless song. This is the enigma of Meroë. The few words we do understand come from proper names, like those of kings and queens, and from obvious loanwords from Egyptian, like the term for priest. But the vast majority of the vocabulary, the grammar, the syntax, it is all a silent echo. We stand before these texts as outsiders looking through a glass door at a vibrant conversation we cannot hear. From an esoteric perspective, this is more than a linguistic puzzle. It represents a direct, unopened portal into the consciousness of a lost civilization. What secrets are permanently encoded in those lines? The inscriptions on temple walls likely describe intricate rituals, prayers to gods whose true names and natures we can only guess. The offering stelae in the royal cemeteries probably give detailed accounts of a king's deeds, his piety, his connection to the divine, providing a spiritual biography now lost. They might contain philosophical treatises, medical knowledge, or astronomical observations unique to the Kushite worldview. There could be histories of their people from their own perspective, free of the filter of their Egyptian rivals or Roman neighbors. Each untranslated text is a sealed chamber containing a fragment of their inner world, their fears, their hopes, and their understanding of the universe. The very act of creating a unique script at the peak of their power suggests a powerful desire for cultural self-definition, to communicate sacred and sovereign ideas in a code that belonged exclusively to them. It was a final declaration of intellectual independence. So while the pyramids of Meroë point silently to the sky, and the ruins of its iron furnaces speak of material power, its written words hold the true key to its soul. And that key remains hidden, buried not in sand, but in the silent architecture of a forgotten language. The silent language of Meroë finds its most dramatic expression not on papyrus, but on the skyline. Far to the south of the Egyptian plateau at Giza, a different kind of pyramid field rises from the desert. These are the pyramids of Meroë, over 200 of them, clustered in groups on sandy ridges overlooking the vanished capital. Their silhouette is instantly recognizable and profoundly different. Where the Great Pyramid of Giza originally soared to 481 feet, the pyramids of Meroë are modest in scale, the tallest reaching perhaps 100 feet. Their most striking feature is their shape. They are not gently sloping giants, but sharply angled, steep-sided spires. The sides incline at a dramatic 70 degrees or more, creating a narrow, pointed peak that seems to pierce the sky with urgent purpose. This was not a failed attempt to copy Egypt. It was a deliberate architectural statement, a reinvention of the form for a new spiritual landscape. While the Egyptian pyramids were part of vast funerary complexes for god-kings, designed for an eternal, solitary majesty, the Meroitic pyramids were more intimate, yet densely packed together. They were primarily royal tombs, yes, but their arrangement tells another story. They were built in tight, familial groups, creating a necropolis, a true city of the dead where the lineage of kings and queens remained in community, even in the afterlife. This was a sacred precinct, where the living would come to perform rituals, connecting the active capital with the eternal one just beyond its borders. Each pyramid was more than a geometric pile of stone. It was a detailed guidebook for the soul's journey. On the eastern side of nearly every structure, facing the rising sun, builders attached a small but crucial feature, an offering chapel. These chapels are where the stone truly speaks. Their walls are covered in intricate carved reliefs, painted in vivid colors that have, in a few rare cases, survived the millennia. These scenes are not generic decorations. They are a precise, ritual roadmap. The central figure is always the deceased ruler, shown in the presence of the gods, receiving the symbols of eternal life and authority. We see the king being embraced by Isis or offered the Ankh, the key of life, by Osiris. But alongside these familiar Egyptian deities, powerful local gods assert their presence, signaling Meroë's unique spiritual blend. Most prominent is Apedemak, a fierce lion-headed god of war and fertility, uniquely Kushite. He is often depicted holding bows and arrows, or with a lion's body, symbolizing the raw, protective power of the kingdom. Beside him frequently stands Meroë, a goddess with a crown of feathers and a crescent moon, a protective consort specific to the Kushite pantheon. The scenes are a meticulous record of ceremony, showing priests making offerings, processions of animals, and the ritual slaughter of cattle, a vital source of sustenance for the spirit. Some researchers look at the precise arrangements of stars, animals, and gods in these tableaus, and see more than myth, They suggest possible astrological symbolism, a mapping of the celestial order onto the king's path to divinity, tying his rebirth to the eternal cycles of the cosmos. Why build them so steep and so close together? The dramatic angle may have been a practical solution to building tall structures with less material. But in a culture so rich with symbolism, form always followed meaning. That sharp ascent could represent a more direct, swift ascent of the king's spirit to the realm of the gods, a ladder to the stars. Their concentrated placement in a necropolis creates a powerful spiritual battery, a zone of immense sacred energy where the collective power of the royal ancestors reinforced the legitimacy and protection of the living kingdom. Theories about their precise astronomical alignments persist, with some suggesting they were oriented to significant solar or stellar events, anchoring the city of the dead to the movements of the heavens. Walking among them today, one feels not the overwhelming isolation of Giza, but a profound sense of gathered presence. This was a dynasty in perpetual congress, a stone community where every pointed silhouette was a permanent prayer, and every carved chapel wall was a portal kept open by memory and ritual. In their silent, steep-sided clusters, they achieved a different kind of immortality, not as solitary giants, but as an eternal family, ruling from a ridge between the desert and the stars. Among these steep pyramids and silent chapels, one figure emerges with a power entirely of this southern soil. He is Apedemak, the lion god, a deity who never found a home in the Egyptian pantheon. His image is unmistakable, carved with ferocious elegance on the temple walls at Naka and Musawwarat es-Sufra. He appears most often as a muscular man with the majestic head of a lion, sometimes crowned with the solar disk and plumes of Ammon, fusing Kushite might with a borrowed celestial authority. In other stunning reliefs, he manifests as a giant, coiled serpent, its body rising from the heart of a blooming lotus flower, a creature of both the earth and the primordial waters. He is never shown unarmed. In his hands or his lion's paws, he grasps bundles of arrows, holds captive enemies by their hair, or wields a long, curved sword. This is the visual language of absolute sovereignty. Apedemak was the divine embodiment of royal power, the patron of the king's military conquests, and the fierce protector of the kingdom's borders. But to label him merely a god of war would be to miss his deeper resonance. He was also a god of fertility, a bestower of bounty. For what is kingship, if not the power to both defend the land and make it flourish? His temples, set in the vast, open landscapes away from the Nile, were places where the king's right to rule was sanctified through this potent, localized force. The esoteric symbolism woven into his forms is profound. The lion is a near-universal solar symbol, representing the fierce, life-giving power of the sun that vanquishes the darkness. As a guardian, it protected the sacred spaces and the person of the king, who was himself considered a living lion of sorts. The serpent emerging from the lotus introduces a more complex layer. The serpent is a chthonic force, connected to the earth, the underworld and regenerative power, as it sheds its skin to be reborn. The lotus in Nile Valley cosmology is the flower that rose from the primordial waters at the dawn of creation, symbolizing purity, rebirth, and the very emergence of ordered life from chaos. So Apedemak, in his serpentine form, encapsulates the entire cycle, from the dark, fertile depths of the earth to the radiant moment of creation. He is the divine energy that fuels both the king's victorious army on the battlefield and the sprouting seed in the field. To stand before his temple at Naka, with its imposing lion-headed statues flanking the entrance, is to feel the focused intention of the Meroitic kings. They were not just building shrines, they were anchoring their authority to a raw, indigenous power source. In worshipping Apedemak, they tied their lineage and their legitimacy to a force that was undiluted, unborrowed, and utterly Kushite. A roaring declaration that their power sprang from this land and its own fierce gods. Far from the ordered pyramids and riverbank temples, another kind of sacred architecture rises from the dry savanna. Musawwarat at es-Sufra is a place that defies easy explanation. Located in a wide valley away from the Nile, its centerpiece is the Great Enclosure, a sprawling, bewildering complex that covers nearly 45,000 square meters. It is not a palace, nor a city. Instead, it is a maze of high walls creating sun-baked courtyards, interconnected by a network of narrow passages and sudden ramps. Dozens of chambers open into these courtyards, many with no obvious function for daily life. There are no kitchens, no bedrooms, no signs of permanent habitation. Walking through its ruins, one is struck by a sense of orchestrated movement, of processional paths leading to dead ends or elevated platforms, as if the very architecture was designed to guide people through a physical and spiritual journey. The sheer scale and puzzling layout have made it one of Kush's greatest archaeological mysteries. What was this vast, isolated complex truly for? Several compelling theories attempt to decode its purpose. One suggests it was a major pilgrimage center, a destination for devotees traveling from across the kingdom to participate in grand festivals. Another, inspired by the numerous carvings of elephants and the presence of what appear to be holding pens, proposes it was a training ground for the sacred elephants used in royal processions and warfare. The most profound theory views the Great Enclosure as a giant ritual complex, a university for priests, and a stage for initiations into the kingdom's deepest mysteries. The architecture itself supports this. The ramps and confined courtyards could have been used to control the movement of initiates, creating spaces for dramatic, sequential revelations. The sudden openings into larger plazas might have been designed for moments of awe, where a secret teaching was unveiled or a powerful icon displayed. Everywhere, the stone walls whisper of the rituals that might have taken place here. The imagery is dominated by two powerful forces. First, the elephant, depicted again and again, often led by a king or a god. This was not just a practical animal. It was a living symbol of immense strength, royal authority, and a deep connection to the untamed African interior. Controlling such a beast was a metaphor for the king's control over the chaotic forces of nature itself. Alongside the elephants, the lion god Apedemak stares out from the walls, his fierce presence a constant reminder of the divine sanction behind royal power. The combination is telling. This was likely a place where the cult of the king, the veneration of animal powers, and the worship of the warrior god fused into a single, overwhelming experience. Imagine the scene during a major festival, the air thick with dust and incense, the sound of drums echoing off the high walls. A procession of priests and initiates winds through the narrow passages, their path lit by torchlight. In a central courtyard, the king stands before an image of Apedemak, perhaps with a ritually prepared elephant nearby, its immense body a living testament to the kingdom's reach. The ceremony would have been designed to overwhelm the senses, to induce a state of ecstatic communion with the divine forces that protected Kush. In this controlled labyrinth, the political and the spiritual became one. The Great Enclosure was not a home for the living, but a machine for manufacturing faith, a stone instrument tuned to resonate with the profound mysteries that kept the kingdom alive. The silent temples and steep pyramids of Meroë were not governed by kings alone. In the shifting sands of Kushite power, another figure could stand at the very apex, a ruler who commanded armies and negotiated with empires. This was the Kandake, a title that has echoed through history, often misunderstood. The word itself does not mean queen in the sense of a king's wife. It is better translated as queen mother or royal woman, and it denoted a position of immense inherent authority. While many Kandaks were the mothers of kings, wielding power from behind the throne, several stepped directly into the light as sovereign rulers in their own right, shattering any assumption that ancient rule was exclusively a man's domain. Their stories are written not just in historical fragments, but in the very stone of their monuments. Look at the surviving statues and reliefs of rulers like Amenishakito. They do not conform to delicate, idealized forms. These queens are depicted as powerful, often corpulent figures, with strong features and full bodies, seated confidently on thrones or standing before the gods. This corpulence was not an aesthetic choice. It was a deliberate statement of prosperity, stability, and divine favor. In a land where scarcity was a constant threat, to show a ruler as abundantly fleshed was to show a kingdom that was fertile and well fed under her guidance. She was the living embodiment of the land's bounty. The most famous example of their formidable nature comes from a direct clash of empires. In the late 1st century before the Common Era, the Roman legions, fresh from their conquest of Ptolemaic Egypt, pushed south into what they considered Nubia. They were met not by a Kushite king, but by the Kandak Amanianas. Roman historians, including Strabo, recorded the conflict, though through a biased lens. They speak of a one-eyed warrior queen, a bold and indomitable leader. Amanianas did not merely defend, she attacked. Her armies marched north, sacking the Roman frontier city of Scene, modern-day Aswan, and toppling statues of Emperor Augustus. Though the war eventually ended in a stalemate and a favorable peace treaty for Kush, the message was clear. A queen had stared down the greatest military power of the Mediterranean world and secured her kingdom's independence. But where did this extraordinary authority originate? It almost certainly flowed from a sacred source. The Kandaks were far more than political leaders. They were almost certainly high priestesses, entwined with the deepest spiritual currents of Kush. Many scholars believe they held the powerful, ancient office of the god's wife of Ammon, the human consort of the state god. This role made them the female counterpart to divine kingship, the necessary vessel through which the god's blessing flowed to the kingdom. In this light, the Kandak embodied a potent feminine divine principle. She may have been seen as the earthly manifestation of the goddess Isis, the supreme mother and magician who reassembled the cosmos after the death of Osiris. Or perhaps she channeled a native Kushite mother goddess like Amsemi, the protective consort with the crescent moon crown. Her authority was thus a complete circuit, fusing the temporal power to command armies with the spiritual power to intercede with the gods. She was the mother of the nation in a literal and metaphysical sense, responsible for both its physical defense and its spiritual nourishment. To follow a Kandak into battle was not just to follow a general. It was to follow a living link to the divine feminine, a force of creation and protection as formidable as any lion god. In the shadows of Meroë's pyramids, the legacy of these women suggests a realm where sovereignty was a balance of complementary powers, and where a queen's strength was measured in both the weight of her army and the depth of her connection to the gods. The true purpose of those steep pyramids was to serve as a final, fortified home for the journey beyond. A typical royal tomb at Meroë was a masterpiece of layered protection and provision. Beneath the stone pyramid, a shaft descended deep into the bedrock, leading to an underground burial chamber. This was not a vast hall, but an intimate, vaulted room designed to be sealed for eternity. Within this sacred space, the deceased ruler was laid to rest upon a stone bed, often within a wooden coffin or sarcophagus. The chamber walls were sometimes painted with protective deities and magical texts, a final spiritual shield for the soul. But the tomb was far from empty. It was a carefully curated collection for the afterlife, a king's or queen's eternal household. Grave goods surrounded the body, a testament to both status and belief. Exquisite gold and silver jewelry adorned the royal form, rings, bracelets, and elaborate collars inlaid with carnelian and glass. Ceremonial weapons, like finely crafted iron spears and bows, were placed nearby, ensuring the ruler could defend their divine station in the next world. Dozens of pottery vessels held offerings of food and drink, sustenance for the eternal journey. Perhaps the most poignant and revealing objects were the bar statues. These were small, intricate figures of a bird with a human head, representing the bar, an aspect of the soul that could travel between the worlds of the living and the dead. These statues were the soul's vehicle, placed in the tomb to guarantee the ruler's mobility and continued presence in the cosmic order. Each tomb was a sealed capsule of belief, a snapshot of a civilization's hopes for what lay beyond the horizon of death. For centuries, the desert sand kept these capsules intact, until a man arrived with dynamite and greed. In 1834, an Italian soldier and treasure hunter named Giuseppe Fellini, convinced that the pyramids held hidden gold, undertook a methodical campaign of destruction. He did not excavate, he demolished. Believing treasure was secreted in the pyramid peaks, he used gunpowder to blast the tops off of more than 40 pyramids at Meroë. The results were catastrophic. Ancient stonework was reduced to rubble. Structures that had stood for 2 millennia were left as broken stumps. His brutal technique was shockingly effective in only one sense. Within the shattered summit of the pyramid of Queen Amenishakito, he discovered a hoard of fabulous treasure. He found hundreds of pieces, including stunning gold rings set with stones, amulets, and a magnificent gold bracelet depicting a winged goddess. He had found the proof he sought, but at an incalculable cost. The context was utterly destroyed, the architectural integrity of the monuments sacrificed for portable wealth. Fellini later sold the treasure in Europe, where it was dispersed among museums, becoming beautiful but orphaned artifacts, stripped of their story. This act is a stark metaphor for the fragmentation of Kushite knowledge. Just as we can read the sounds of the Meroitic script, but not its meaning, we can admire Amenishakito's gold, but cannot reconstruct the precise ritual sequence of her burial. The prayers that were spoken as each piece was laid to rest. The dynamite blast represents the violence of a colonial mindset that valued objects over understanding, that saw these sacred structures not as portals to a lost world, but as locked boxes to be cracked open for profit. It created a double silence, the literal ruin of the monuments, and the metaphorical severing of the objects from their spiritual home. Every scarred pyramid apex stands as a monument to this rupture, a physical wound where a complete story was shattered into scattered, glittering fragments. The shattered pyramids stand as a silent testament to what was lost, but another legacy of Meroë still stains the earth itself. Surrounding the ancient city are great, dark mounds that rise from the desert like artificial hills. These are not ruins of buildings, but mountains of slag, the stony waste left over from smelting iron. They are the physical evidence of an industrial revolution that powered the kingdom's final centuries. Kush was one of the ancient world's foremost producers of iron, and this technological mastery provided a formidable foundation for its enduring independence. The advantages were both economic and military. Iron tools made agriculture more efficient, clearing land and tilling soil with a durability bronze could not match. But more crucially, iron weapons gave the Meroitic army its teeth. Swords, spearheads, and arrowheads forged from this stronger metal could hold a sharper edge and penetrate armor that would turn aside bronze. This self-sufficiency in arms manufacturing meant Kush was not reliant on trade for its security. It could equip its own warriors with superior gear, a critical factor in resisting foreign pressures from the north, whether from the Ptolemaic Greeks or later the Romans. The furnaces of Meroë, burning day and night, literally forged the kingdom's sovereignty. Yet to view this only as a practical industry may be to miss a deeper layer of meaning. Across many ancient and traditional cultures worldwide, the work of the smith was never just a trade. It was a sacred, almost magical craft. The smith was a master of elemental transformation, a person who could take a worthless piece of earth, a dull, heavy ore, and through the application of fire and breath and skilled force, transmute it into a shining, powerful substance. This process of creation from raw chaos mirrored the acts of the gods themselves. In Kush, it is compelling to wonder if the ironworkers were seen as performing a ritual as much as a technical task. The roaring furnace could have been an altar, the molten metal, a sacred liquid fire pulled from the belly of the earth. Who would preside over such a potent transformation? The fierce lion god Apedemak, often shown wielding iron weapons, is a prime candidate. As a deity of both martial power and fertile bounty, he embodies the dual nature of iron itself, a material that could plow a field or cut down an enemy. The smiths, under the protection of such a god, might have been a revered priestly class. Their workshops considered holy spaces where the kingdom's defensive and productive strength was literally conjured from stone and flame. The great slag heaps, then, are not mere industrial waste. They are the accumulated physical residue of a continuous, sacred act, the earthly remains of a spiritual technology that kept the heart of Kush beating strong and independent for centuries. The roar of Meroë's furnaces forged the swords that would meet the most disciplined army in the world. When Rome annexed Egypt after the death of Cleopatra, the vast, silent desert to the south became a new and uncertain frontier. The Romans saw it as a buffer zone to be secured. The Kushites saw it as a sacred borderland, the northern approach to their holy places. Tensions simmered until they exploded into a series of conflicts, now called the Roman-Kushite Wars. The flashpoint was a Kushite raid of breathtaking audacity. Led by the one-eyed Kandake Amanianas, and likely her son Prince Akinadad, Kushite forces surged north around 25 years before the Common Era. They overwhelmed the Roman garrisons, sacked the frontier city of Sin, modern Aswan, and humiliated the new imperial power by toppling bronze statues of Emperor Augustus. They carried the emperor's severed bronze head back to Meroë as a trophy, later burying it beneath the steps of a temple, so that every supplicant would symbolically tread upon Roman pride. Rome's retaliation was swift and brutal. The Roman prefect of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, marched a legion of 10,000 infantry and 800 cavalry south. He recaptured the frontier towns, then pushed deep into Kushite territory, following the Nile into the heart of the old Napatan region. His target was the symbolic core of Kushite power, the religious capital of Napata itself. The city was sacked and its inhabitants enslaved, a devastating blow to the kingdom's ancient spiritual lineage. Yet Petronius found no vast army waiting for a decisive battle. The Kushites, masters of their harsh terrain, refused to engage the legion on Roman terms. They harried the invaders, attacking supply lines and disappearing into the desert. Facing a protracted guerrilla war in an unforgiving land, the Romans eventually withdrew to a fortified frontier further north, leaving behind garrisoned forts. What followed was a stalemate of raids and skirmishes that lasted for years, a grinding conflict neither side could decisively win. This stalemate led to one of antiquity's most remarkable diplomatic resolutions. Sometime around 20 years before the Common Era, a peace treaty was negotiated, not in Rome or Meroë, but on the island of Samos between Emperor Augustus and Kushite ambassadors. The terms, as recorded by the geographer Strabo, were strikingly favorable to Kush. Rome withdrew its frontier back to the old Ptolemaic border near Maharaka, effectively ceding the disputed territory. The Kushites were exempted from paying any tribute to Rome. Most tellingly, a buffer zone was established between the two powers, a no-man's land that granted Kush the breathing room it desperately needed. For a fledgling empire used to dictating terms, this was a clear compromise. Rome had met an enemy it could not simply absorb. But to view this only as a political and military struggle is to miss its profound spiritual dimension. This was a clash of cosmic worldviews. Roman religion was a pragmatic, state-centric affair. The gods were honored through precise ritual to ensure the security and success of the Roman state. Victory in battle was a sign of divine favor, but the emperor, while revered, was not a living god in the same visceral sense. For Kush, every action was saturated with divine purpose. The Kandake Amananas was not just a political leader, she was a divine vessel, likely the god's wife of Ammon. Her decision to attack was almost certainly sanctioned by the oracle of Ammon, a direct command from the god to defend his domain. When they toppled Augustus's statues, it was not mere vandalism. It was a ritual act of desecration against a rival source of earthly power, breaking its symbolic strength. They were defending more than farmland or trade routes. They were defending the sacred geography of their kingdom, the mountain of Jebel Barkal, the temples of Napata, the entire Axis Mundi that connected their rulers to the gods. To allow Roman standards to advance was to allow a foreign, profane order to encroach upon the very machinery of their cosmos. The eventual peace treaty, therefore, was not just a political victory for Kush. It was a divine affirmation. The oracle had commanded a defense, and the kingdom had endured. The gods had proven stronger than the legions. This spiritual resilience, this unshakable belief that their land was divinely ordained, may have been the true fortress that Rome could never breach. Even as the treaty with Rome secured the northern border, other pressures were building in the places maps left blank. The security of Kush had always relied on controlling the Nile corridor, but the vast deserts to the east and the open savannas to the south and west were never truly empty. From these margins, new forces began to move, not as organized empires, but as waves of change that would slowly erode the kingdom's foundations. From the arid reaches of the eastern desert came the Blenmais, a nomadic people who appear in Roman and later sources as fierce raiders. They were masters of the harsh landscape, moving with their herds and launching swift strikes against settled communities and trade caravans along the Nile. For centuries, the powerful Meroitic state had likely managed these groups through a combination of military patrols and negotiated agreements, perhaps even employing them as mercenaries or trading partners. But as the central authority in Meroë may have begun to waver in its later centuries, the relationship shifted. The Blenmais grew bolder, their raids penetrating deeper, threatening the agricultural heartland and the vital trade routes that were the kingdom's economic lifeblood. Some evidence even suggests a more complex entanglement, with Blenmai warriors possibly being hired into the Kushite army, or forming uneasy alliances with factions within the weakening state. They were not seeking to build an empire, but to secure grazing lands, water, and wealth, their persistent pressure acting like a constant drain on the kingdom's resources and attention. Simultaneously, from the south and southwest, came another transformative force, groups often referred to in inscriptions as the Noba. These were not a single unified people, but likely a collection of tribes and clans, some perhaps pushed by climatic changes or the expansion of other powers in the African interior. They began to settle in the southern regions of the Kushite realm, initially perhaps as migrants, then as permanent communities. Over time, their presence grew from infiltration to outright occupation. Archaeological records show that in the later periods, some royal pyramids at Meroë were looted and then reused for noble burials, a stark physical symbol of a changing order. This was far more than a military invasion. It was a demographic and cultural shift. The noble brought their own languages, their own social structures, and their own spiritual beliefs. The established Meroitic order, with its divine king, its complex priesthood, and its state cult of Amun and Apedemak, would have seemed alien, perhaps even irrelevant, to these new inhabitants. The royal authority, which derived its power from a specific sacred geography and a tightly controlled theology, would have had little hold over people whose gods resided in different mountains or ancestral spirits. This dual pressure represents a fundamental transformation of the spiritual and ethnic landscape. For centuries, Kushite identity and power were concentrated along the Nile, radiating from urban temple complexes and royal capitals. The Blenmais from the desert and the Noba from the southern grasslands represented a different way of life, one less anchored to cities and stone monuments, and more connected to mobile pastoralism and tribal loyalties. Their increasing presence diluted the very concept of a centralized, divinely ordained kingdom. How could the oracle of Amun command the loyalty of a Blenmai chieftain, who worshipped a god of the desert wells? What power did the Kandake hold over a Noba tribesman, whose allegiance was to his clan and local elders? The core Meroitic royal cult depended on a unified population that accepted its cosmological narrative. As new peoples with competing narratives settled within the kingdom's territory, that unifying story fragmented. The state may have gradually transformed, absorbing these groups in a way that changed its own nature, becoming less the Kingdom of Kush and more a patchwork of different peoples under a weakened crown. The slow fading of Meroë, therefore, might not have been a sudden conquest by a foreign army, but a quiet submersion as the deep, singular current of Kushite civilization gradually dispersed into many new streams. The furnace fires that forged Meroë's strength may have ultimately consumed its future. For centuries, the kingdom's iron industry burned through the acacia forests surrounding the capital, a necessary fuel for its sovereignty. But trees are not an infinite resource. Over generations, the relentless demand for charcoal to feed the smelters likely led to severe deforestation. This was more than an environmental footnote. It was a direct attack on the land's vitality. Without tree roots to hold the soil, the rich earth around Meroë would have begun to erode, washed away by seasonal rains, leaving the agricultural base that fed the great city increasingly vulnerable. This man-made strain may have collided with a larger natural force, a gradual climatic shift towards greater aridity in the region. The savannas may have dried. The reliable rains that once made Meroë's island so fertile could have become less predictable. A kingdom built on abundant harvests and industrial would have found itself caught in a tightening vise, its environment slowly turning against it. As the land struggled, so too did the kingdom's economic heart. Kush's wealth had always flowed along the Nile trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean world with the African interior. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Common Era, the world was changing. New maritime routes across the Red Sea, dominated by the rising power of Axum to the east, began to bypass the traditional Nile corridor altogether. Merchants found it faster and safer to ship goods directly by sea, cutting out the Kushite middlemen. At the same time, the desert tribes, like the Blenmais, grew increasingly disruptive, making overland caravan travel along the river more hazardous and expensive. The golden flow of commerce that had sustained Meroë for a millennium began to slow to a trickle. The royal coffers would have dwindled, making it harder to maintain the army, the priesthood, and the grand monuments that projected divine authority. The spiritual economy of the kingdom was inextricably tied to its material one. Without the wealth to fund elaborate temple rituals and to provision the royal tombs, the entire performance of kingship, the visible proof of the gods' favor, would have begun to fray. The final recorded blow came not from the desert or the sea, but from a rival kingdom that had risen to prominence by mastering those very routes. Around 350 years into the Common Era, the Aksumite king, es-Sufra, led a campaign into the heart of the weakening Kushite realm. His inscriptions boast of destroying towns, taking captives, and demolishing the statues of the Kushite gods. This was more than a raid, it was a calculated strike against a competitor. Aksum, a Christianizing state with strong ties to the Eastern Roman Empire, represented a new order. The invasion likely targeted the remaining centers of Meroitic power, delivering a military coup de grace to a state already buckling under ecological and economic stress. The royal line may have been broken, the capital sacked, the machinery of government shattered beyond repair. Yet from an esoteric perspective, the true collapse may have been perceived as something far more profound than military defeat. For over 1,000 years, Kushite kings had ruled as the living sons of Ammon, their power affirmed by the lion god Apedemak. Their legitimacy was a divine mandate, a contract with the gods that ensured the land's fertility and the kingdom's protection. When the fields began to fail, when the trade goods stopped coming, when enemies breached the sacred borders, how would the people and the priests have interpreted these calamities? It would have appeared that the gods themselves had withdrawn their favor. The mandate of heaven had been broken. The rituals no longer worked, the oracles fell silent, the divine current that animated the king and energized the kingdom seemed to short-circuit. This perceived loss of divine sanction could have triggered a catastrophic internal failure, a crisis of faith that eroded loyalty and paralyzed the state from within long before any foreign army arrived. Did Meroë fall because the gods abandoned it? Or did the gods seem to abandon it because the intricate, sacred balance that sustained the civilization had finally, quietly, come undone? The silence that followed was absolute, and it was declared a victory in stone far to the east. In the highlands of Aksum, King es-Sufra raised a stela to commemorate his campaign. The inscription, written in both Ge'ez and Greek, is chillingly matter-of-fact. It states simply that his armies marched into the land of the Noba, and there he destroyed the remnant of Kush. That word remnant is telling. It suggests es-Sufra did not face a mighty empire at its peak, but something already diminished, a lingering shadow of former glory. His forces likely sacked what remained of the capital region, toppling the statues of gods and kings that symbolized the old power. Back at the site of Meroë itself, archaeologists have found a layer of ash and charcoal in the royal city, evidence of a great and violent fire that swept through its heart. This was not an accidental blaze. It was the final physical punctuation mark on a long story. The fire consumed wooden palaces and storehouses, and when the smoke cleared, no one came to rebuild. Imagine the slow, quiet years that followed. The great temple enclosures, once alive with chanting and the scent of incense, stood open to the wind. Sand, carried on the hot breath of the desert, began its patient work. It drifted through empty doorways, piled in corners of roofless chambers, and gradually smoothed the sharp edges of carved reliefs. The pyramids on their ridge became silent sentinels, their gold looted, their chapels dark. The furnaces that once lit the night sky grew cold, their last embers buried. The complex irrigation channels that fed the island's fields silted up and cracked under the sun. Nature did not conquer with a roar, but with a whisper, reclaiming stone by stone. The city did not vanish overnight. It simply emptied of meaning, becoming a skeleton slowly dressed in sand. With the royal court gone, the entire intricate system that gave life to Kushite civilization unraveled. The priesthood of Amun, which for centuries had interpreted the god's will and anointed divine kings, had no one left to anoint. The sacred rituals, the festivals at Musawwarat at es-Sufra, the processions to the lion god's temples, all ceased. The knowledge of how to perform them, the precise words and movements passed down through generations, faded from memory. Most profoundly, the meaning behind the elegant marks of the Meroitic script was lost. The last priests or scribes who could fully understand those texts took their knowledge to the grave. The language became a beautiful cipher, a locked door to a library of thought, prayer, and history. What was lost in that final silence was not merely a political entity. It was a complete and sophisticated worldview, a way of understanding humanity's place between the mountain of God and the river of life. An entire cosmology with its own gods, its own stories of creation and kingship, its own maps for the afterlife, fell into a sleep from which it has never fully awakened. The ruins were not just abandoned buildings, they were the physical shell of a forgotten dream. The fire at Meroë was not the end of the story, only the end of a chapter. In the silence that followed, a new kind of kingdom rose from the ashes, one that has long puzzled archaeologists. For decades, scholars label the culture that emerged in Lower Nubia simply as the X group, a placeholder name for a people whose identity seemed lost. Today, we know them better by the place that revealed their secrets, Bellona. What they built in the centuries after Meroë's fall was not a grand city of temples, but something more intimate and telling. They buried their kings in a way that would have felt hauntingly familiar to the old Kushite pharaohs. They constructed massive, circular earthen tumuli, great mounds rising from the desert floor. Beneath these mounds, they dug deep, brick-lined burial chambers, and within them they laid their rulers to rest with a profound and symbolic generosity. The king was often placed atop a wooden bed or in a wooden chamber, surrounded by the tools of his eternal reign. They included weaponry, fine pottery, and exquisite jewelry. But the most striking features were the crowns. These were not simple circlets, but elaborate masterworks of silver and bronze, adorned with intricate designs of rams' heads, cobras, and Christian crosses, a fascinating blend of old and new symbols. And then there were the animals. Horses, camels, and even dogs were sacrificed and buried with the king, their bodies arranged with care in separate pits or within the main chamber. This was not a random act of wealth. It was a ritual echo. The sacrifice of animals to accompany a ruler into the afterlife was a practice with deep roots in Kush, stretching all the way back to the royal tumuli of ancient Kerma over 2,000 years earlier. The Bellona kings were speaking a funerary language their ancestors would have understood perfectly. This is where we see the hidden continuity. The grand Meroitic state had collapsed, its script fell silent, and its political power evaporated. But the underlying spiritual and cultural bedrock did not simply vanish. It persisted underground in the practices of the people who remained. The artistic styles found on Bellona pottery and metalwork show a clear evolution from Meroitic motifs. The concept of the king as a divine or semi-divine figure, whose journey to the afterlife required provision and companionship, remained powerfully intact. The symbols of power, like the ram associated with the god Amun, continued to be used, even as new Christian iconography began to appear alongside them. It was a period of quiet synthesis, where the old Kushite soul adapted to a new political reality. These rulers were likely local chieftains who filled the power vacuum left by Meroë, and they reached back into the deepest layers of Nubian tradition to legitimize their rule. By burying their dead in the old way, they were making a statement about lineage and legitimacy. They were connecting themselves to the sacred landscape and its ancient rhythms of death and rebirth, even if they no longer wrote the name of Amun on temple walls. The Bologna culture represents a crucial bridge, a twilight era where the light of Kush did not go out, but was carried in a different vessel, its flame protected within the confines of the tomb before it would be transformed once more by a new, universal faith. The silent pyramids of Meroë have always invited more than just historical curiosity. In the spaces left by untranslated texts and forgotten rituals, the imagination finds fertile ground. Over the past century, the lost Kingdom of Kush has been pulled into the orbit of esoteric and alternative history, often framed as a kind of Nile Valley Atlantis. Some speculative writers, drawing on vague classical references and the sheer scale of its forgotten achievements, have tenuously linked Kush to legends of a primordial, advanced civilization that predated Egypt itself. The idea proposes that the wisdom of this lost world flowed north, seeding the pharaonic culture, and that Kush was not Egypt's rival, but its forgotten ancestor. While mainstream archaeology finds no evidence for such a direct lineage, the appeal is understandable. Here was a sophisticated, independent African kingdom with its own pyramids, its own mysterious script, and a history of conquering its famous neighbor. For those searching for a hidden chapter in human history, Kush presents a tantalizingly blank page. This reinterpretation finds its most powerful expression within Afrocentric historical thought. Here, Kush is not an obscure footnote, but a central fount of black excellence and spiritual sophistication. In this view, the standard narrative of civilization flowing from the Mediterranean is inverted. Instead, the cradle is placed further south, in the heart of Africa, with Kush as a primary source. The Black Pharaohs of the 25th Dynasty become emblematic figures, proof of a time when African rulers governed one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations, restoring its traditions and ethics. This perspective rightly corrects a long history of omission and marginalization, insisting that Kush be acknowledged not as a peripheral shadow of Egypt, but as a brilliant civilization in its own right, one that fundamentally shaped the course of Nile Valley history. It reclaims the narrative, placing African agency and achievement at the very center of the story. The kingdom's specific mysteries make it a perfect canvas for such projections. Its undeciphered Meroitic script is not just a linguistic puzzle. It is a potential vault of lost knowledge. What profound philosophies or spiritual insights are locked within those elegant characters? The unique, steep-sided pyramids of Meroë, so different from Giza, suggest a distinct and possibly more advanced architectural or astronomical understanding to some speculators. The prominence of powerful ruling queens, the Kandakes, aligns with ideals of matriarchal wisdom and balanced governance. Even the kingdom's enigmatic decline, falling not to a clearly named enemy but to a confluence of shadows, allows for theories of a deliberate withdrawal or a spiritual cataclysm rather than a simple military defeat. Kush embodies the archetype of the lost golden age, a sophisticated world that vanished, leaving behind majestic ruins and unanswered questions. This esoteric and reclaimed fascination serves a deeper human need. It speaks to a desire for origins that inspire, for histories that empower, and for mysteries that remind us how much of the past remains alive with possibility. Whether one engages with the rigorous work of archaeologists or the speculative visions of alternative historians, the effect is the same: Kush commands attention. It forces a re-examination of the map, a second look at the timeline. It whispers that the story we think we know is incomplete. In the end, the true power of Kush may lie in this dual legacy. Its stones provide a firm foundation for historical reclamation, while its silences echo with the enduring human longing to find wonder in the dust of time. The silence that followed Kush's fall lasted for centuries, broken not by conquering armies, but by the quiet scratch of a scholar's trowel. The modern rediscovery of this lost kingdom began in earnest in the early 20th century, spearheaded by a man whose work would define the field for generations: the American Egyptologist George Reisner. Leading the Harvard University Boston Museum of Fine Arts expedition, Reisner arrived in Sudan with a meticulous, systematic approach. From 1913 to 1932, his teams surveyed, mapped, and excavated key sites from Kerma to Napota and Meroë. His great contribution was establishing a chronological framework, painstakingly organizing the sequence of kings and pottery styles that gave shape to Kush's long history. Yet his perspective was inevitably colored by his time. Reisner often viewed Kush through an Egyptian lens, interpreting its achievements as derivative, a mere reflection of its northern neighbor. He saw the civilization as one that borrowed its greatness, rather than generating its own. This foundational view, while providing essential data, cast a long shadow, initially obscuring the profound originality of Kushite culture. It would take new generations, with new questions, to begin peeling back those assumptions. Today, the work continues as a truly international endeavor. Archaeologists from Sudan, Germany, France, Poland, Britain, and beyond now collaborate in the field. Their focus has shifted dramatically from simply cataloging kings to understanding the people. They excavate not just royal pyramids, but the modest homes of artisans, the workshops of potters and iron smelters, and the humble graves of farmers. Each fragment of a cooking pot, each discarded tool, each seed found in a storage bin is a whisper from the daily life that sustained the empire. A German team at Meroë has been meticulously studying the city's urban layout, revealing a sophisticated metropolis with distinct industrial and residential quarters. French archaeologists at Sedenga have uncovered a vast field of small, non-royal pyramids, shedding light on the beliefs of the elite beyond the royal family. Polish researchers at Old Dongola, though working on a later Christian site, contribute to understanding the long-term human landscape of Nubia. This collaborative mosaic is slowly replacing the portrait of a monolithic kingdom with a vibrant tapestry of a living, breathing society. The challenges these teams face are as immense as the desert itself. Site preservation is a constant, desperate race. The pyramids of Meroë, already scarred by 19th century treasure hunters, now face erosion from wind and rare but violent rainstorms. The delicate painted reliefs in offering chapels are fading under the relentless sun. Looting remains a dire threat, fueled by poverty and the international market for antiquities, silently erasing context and history forever. Alongside the physical decay is the enduring intellectual puzzle, the Meroitic script. While linguists have made strides in identifying grammatical structures and a few more words, the language's core meaning remains locked. Every new inscription found is a potential key, but the lock has yet to turn. Perhaps the greatest challenge is the political reality of working in modern Sudan. Archaeology here operates amidst economic hardship, political instability, and international sanctions. Securing funding is difficult, obtaining permits can be unpredictable, and ensuring the safety of both sites and researchers requires immense local partnership and resilience. The work is an act of faith, conducted in a landscape where the past is both a source of national pride and a casualty of present-day struggles. Yet, it is precisely within these challenges that the thrilling potential lies. Every new excavation season holds the possibility of a revelation that could rewrite a paragraph, or even a chapter, of Kushite history. The discovery of an intact, unlooted tomb could provide a complete set of grave goods in their original arrangement, a frozen moment of ritual that explains the journey of the soul. Finding a new cache of Meroitic inscriptions, especially a bilingual text, is the perennial dream, the potential Rosetta Stone that could suddenly give voice to 1,000 silent texts. Even the analysis of soil samples or animal bones can revolutionize our understanding. Did a changing climate really strain their agriculture? What did a typical family actually eat? How far did their trade networks truly extend? Each answer adds a brushstroke to the picture of their spiritual life. By understanding the daily rhythms of the potter, the smith, and the farmer, we begin to comprehend the society that built the temples and believed in the gods. The divine kings and fierce lion gods did not exist in a vacuum. They were sustained by the labor, the faith, and the daily choices of an entire civilization. Every shard of pottery, every piece of slag from a furnace, is a fragment of the worldview that saw a god in a mountain and a king as a bridge to the stars. The desert still holds these stories, waiting for the next patient hand to brush away the sand. The stones of Kush fell silent, but the river of its people never stopped flowing. Centuries after the last pyramid was built, a new spiritual current swept up the Nile, one that would transform the landscape of belief forever. Beginning around the 6th century of the Common Era, Christian missionaries, both from the Byzantine Empire and from Egypt, found fertile ground in Nubia. The old gods Ammon and Apedemak were formally set aside, and in their place rose a new faith centered on the Christ Pantocrator, the all-powerful ruler of the universe. On the surface, this seems like a complete break, a final erasure of the Kushite past, but look closer. The conversion was not a conquest of empty land, it was a transformation of a living culture. The Nubians who embraced Christianity were not newcomers. They were the direct descendants of the Meroitic people and the Bellona culture, inheritors of a 2,000-year legacy of statecraft, art, and devotion. They did not cease to be Nubian when they became Christian. They became Christian in a uniquely Nubian way. This is where we see the genius of cultural continuity. The medieval Nubian kingdoms, like Mercuria and Nobatia, built magnificent cathedrals and churches, but their architecture tells a subtle story. They often used red brick, a material that echoed the mud brick traditions of ancient Kush. The designs of these churches, with their distinctive domes and vaulted ceilings, synthesized Byzantine influences with a local aesthetic sense that felt at home in the Nile Valley. Even the powerful institution of kingship persisted. The Nubian Christian kings ruled as defenders of the faith, but their authority still flowed from a sacred connection to the land and its people, a faint echo of the divine mandate of the Black Pharaohs. The region remained what it had always been, a spiritual crossroads, now between Constantinople and the African interior. Later, from the 14th century onward, Islam would become the dominant faith, adding another profound layer to this palimpsest of belief. Yet through each transformation, the underlying substrate remained. The people, their languages, their deep knowledge of the river's rhythms, their very identity as children of this specific stretch of the Nile, endured. This is the most powerful argument for Kush's living legacy. It is not found only in ruined pyramids, but in the faces and voices of the modern Nubian people. They are, in a very real sense, the living descendants of the Kushites. While their languages have evolved and their religions have changed, a profound cultural and genetic continuity bridges the millennia. They carry forward an ancient connection to this valley, a collective memory embedded in folklore, in agricultural practices, and in a profound sense of place. The modern Nubian diaspora, displaced by the rising waters of the Aswan High Dam in the 20th century, speaks to this enduring bond. Their longing for their ancestral villages along the Nile is a contemporary echo of a much older attachment, a loyalty to a homeland first defined by the Kingdom of Kerma and fortified by the rulers of Meroë. The specific beliefs have transformed, from the oracle of Ammon to the prayers in a mosque or church. But the role of this land as a sacred center, a source of identity and resilience, has never faded. Kush did not vanish, it metamorphosed. Its political power dissolved, its script was forgotten, but its people adapted, absorbed new ideas and persisted. They are the true keepers of the legacy, not in preserving unchanged rituals, but in embodying the unbroken thread of life along the river that once nourished a kingdom of gods and kings. From the circular tombs of Kerma to the iron-forged spires of Meroë, the Kingdom of Kush carved a saga of over 2,000 years. This was not a passive neighbor living in Egypt's shadow, but a formidable rival, a divine conqueror, and finally, a civilization that turned inward to forge something entirely its own. Its story is a pendulum swing of power, from the foundational might that challenged the old kingdom, to the stunning reversal when the Black Pharaohs restored order from chaos, to the resilient, enigmatic final act where they wrote their own language and worshipped their own lion god. Kush was a spiritual engine, a kingdom where politics was prophecy and kingship was a cosmic contract. Its true legacy lies in that profound fusion of earth and heaven, where every pyramid was a prayer, and every royal decree echoed the voice of a god from a sacred mountain. And yet, for all we have uncovered, Kush guards its deepest secrets with a silent, elegant script we cannot read. The purpose of the sprawling great enclosure at Musawwarat, at es-Sufra, remains a subject of awe and debate, a stone labyrinth for rituals we can only imagine. The full nature of gods like Apedemak, a deity of both the sword and the seed, whispers to us from temple walls without ever fully revealing his mysteries. These are not mere gaps in a historical record, they are open doors, invitations to wonder. They remind us that history is not a solved puzzle, but a conversation with the past, where every answer uncovers new, more fascinating questions. To understand the ancient Nile Valley, we must finally look beyond the monumental fame of Egypt and see the brilliant, independent flame that burned just to the south. Kush was a parallel sun in that desert sky, a civilization of profound sophistication, spiritual depth, and resilient power. Its memory challenges us to expand our map of the ancient world. So what do you think is Kush's greatest unanswered mystery? Is it the meaning locked within the Meroitic script, the true purpose of the great enclosure, or the sudden silence that followed its final days? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to join more journeys into the lost corners of history, be sure to subscribe. The stories of forgotten kingdoms remind us of a fragile truth, that the rise and fall of entire worlds, of gods and languages and ways of seeing the universe, often rests in the patient keeping of sand, stone,